The President of the United States says America has far more munitions than anyone in the world, and far more than we need. At almost the exact same moment, sources inside his own government were telling Reuters that the U.S. Army has used virtually all of its long-range precision missiles fighting Iran. Both of those statements are on the record. They cannot both be fully true. And which one you believe should probably worry you either way. Let me lay out what was actually reported, because this is serious, and I'm going to stick tightly to the sourcing. According to Reuters, and then confirmed independently by CBS News, with additional reporting from CNBC and Military Times, the U.S. Army has used up virtually all of two specific weapons during its roughly 5-month war with Iran: the Army Tactical Missile System, known as ATACMS, and the newer Precision Strike Missile, or PRSM. These are surface-to-surface missiles. They let the U.S. hit targets accurately from a long distance, without sending in piloted aircraft that can get shot down by air defenses. They cost more than $1 million each. Reuters cited 3 people familiar with the internal data. CBS said 2 sources with direct knowledge confirmed it. This is not a rumor from a random account online. This is multiple major outlets, multiple sources, same conclusion, and it goes deeper than just those 2 missiles. Has also burned through a little less than half of its entire global supply of Tomahawk cruise missiles since the war began. And on the defensive side, the interceptors that shoot down incoming missiles, a report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, estimated the U.S. has fired more than 60% of its key Patriot and THAAD interceptors. Their numbers: fewer than 827 Patriot interceptors left, down from a pre-war estimate of around 2,200. Fewer than 278 THAAD interceptors, down from about 452. And here's a detail that tells you how real this is inside the building. Reuters reported that General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, personally cited the dwindling stockpile in a meeting with the president before a pause in strikes was announced. So now put the White House response next to that. Asked about the stockpile data, the administration issued a statement from Trump, saying the U.S. has far more munitions than anyone in the world and far more than we need. And here's where I have to be a critic, not a stenographer. Notice that the statement doesn't actually deny the specific claim. We have more than anyone else in the world can be completely true and totally irrelevant at the same time. The U.S. having more missiles than, say, Belgium tells you nothing about whether it has enough of the specific long-range missiles it just fired off. It's the classic move. Answer a precise, uncomfortable question with a vague, comforting boast, and hope nobody notices they're not the same statement. The reporting is specific. Virtually all of the ATACMS gone. The response is general. We're number 1. Those don't cancel out. One is an answer, the other is a slogan. Now, in fairness, let me give the strongest version of the government's case, because there is one. Running down your stockpile in a war is, in one sense, what a stockpile is for. You buy the missiles to use them, and you'd rather expend missiles than lose pilots, which is exactly the trade-off these weapons exist to make. The Army has said ATACMS were already being phased out in favor of the newer PRSM anyway, and that it's ordered a large number of PRSMs for 2027. So, a defender would say, this is a managed drawdown. Replacements are coming, and the sky is not falling. But here's why I don't find that fully reassuring, and why I think this is the more important story than the market records everyone's cheering. 2 reasons. First, the timing gap. We've ordered more for 2027. Does nothing for you in 2026. Precision missiles are not something you can rush to a store and restock. They take years to build. So, if a second crisis erupts now, and I'll remind you, the Reuters reporting itself flags that these exact weapons would be critical against an adversary with strong air defenses like China. The cupboard is bare in the window that matters. Second, and this is the part that should really land, the reason this leaked at all is that it became, in Reuters' words, a pressure point inside the administration. Multiple outlets reported that the president reportedly decided against launching another massive offensive inside Iran in part because his own military advisors warned him about the stockpile. Think about what that means. The depletion isn't just an accounting problem. It may already be constraining what the most powerful military on Earth believes it can safely do. When your options are limited by your inventory, the enemy doesn't need to beat you. They just need to make you keep firing. The scandal here isn't that America used a lot of missiles in a war. Wars burn munitions. That's the grim arithmetic of them. The scandal is the gap between the private data and the public message, behind closed doors. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is reportedly warning the president that the shelves are getting empty. In front of the cameras, the message is far more than we need. Those two things cannot both be the whole truth. And in a democracy, you, the citizen, are supposed to get told which one is real before the next war, not after. The question I'll leave you with: if the confident public number and the alarming private number disagree this sharply on something as countable as missiles, where else is that same gap hiding? And funny enough, that exact gap between the confident headline number and the uglier reality underneath it is the whole story of the stock market this week too. Let me show you. If you glanced at the headlines this week, you saw one thing: records. The S&P 500 and the Dow both closed at all-time highs. The S&P touched something like 7,793, a fresh record. Japan's market jumped 3.5%. It's a party. The confident round headline number says everything is fantastic, but I want to take you underneath the index, because a stock index is an average, and averages are very, very good at hiding bodies. Here is what was actually happening to individual companies on the same days those records were being set. According to the Street's market coverage, Honeywell's aerospace division fell about 10% after its earnings came in below forecasts. A company called CDW, an IT solutions provider, dropped almost 13% on a profit squeeze and an executive departure. Insulet, a medical device maker, sank 17% after it cut its full-year outlook. And in the advertising technology world, it was a bloodbath. Criteo down around 27%, Taboola down about 17%. Both flashing warnings about digital ad budgets drying up. These are not tiny numbers. A stock falling 17 or 27% in a day is a small catastrophe for the people who own it. And it was all happening while the index above them printed a cheerful new record. So how do both things happen at once? Simple. And this is the part worth understanding. A handful of enormous companies, the AI and tech giants, are so large that when they go up, they drag the whole index up with them, and their gains mathematically paper over dozens of smaller companies, quietly collapsing underneath. The word analysts use is bifurcated, a split market, a two-tier market. The generals are marching forward, and the troops are getting slaughtered, but the newspaper only prints the general's position. When you're told the market hit a record today, what you're often really being told is, the 5 biggest stocks hit a record today, and please don't look at the other 495. And here's my critical point. The reason I'm putting this next to the missile story. The index is the far more than we need of finance. It's the confident, reassuring, technically true headline that hides the specific uncomfortable reality. Yes, the S&P set a record. That's true. But if you owned Insulet or Criteo this week, your reality was a double-digit loss. And no amount of index cheerleading changes that. The healthy-looking average is concealing real pain in the underlying names. And historically, I'm not predicting, I'm noting the pattern. A market where the index keeps climbing while more and more individual stocks quietly break down is called narrowing breadth. And it's the kind of thing that looks perfectly fine right up until the few stocks holding the whole thing up finally wobble. My take. Don't confuse the scoreboard with the game. Record high is a real fact and an incomplete one, and the incompleteness is doing a lot of quiet work. When the average is euphoric, but the individual companies underneath are bleeding out one by one, the smart question isn't how high can the record go, it's how many soldiers can fall before the generals notice they're alone. The confident number on top is not lying to you. It's just not telling you the whole truth, which, as we just saw with the missiles, is its own kind of problem. All right, Let me bring this all the way down from missiles and markets to something sitting in almost every home with a kid in it. The phone in your 11-year-old's hand. Because a big new study just put a number on a fear a lot of parents have had for years. And, true to the theme of today, the headline and the reality are not quite the same thing. Here's the study. Published this week in the journal Nature Human Behavior, researchers tracked 227 Italian students over several years. And the finding, as reported by Euronews, The Guardian, and Newsweek, is striking. Kids who opened their first personal social media account earlier, around ages 11 to 12, scored measurably worse on standardized tests years later than classmates who waited. We're talking about roughly 0.22 standard deviations lower in Italian and 0.18 lower in math by 8th grade. And it didn't fade. By 10th grade, the math gap had actually widened to 0.27. To translate that out of statistics, the researchers and the Guardian's write-up put it at roughly the equivalent of 6 months of learning lost by age 16. 6 months. And the single best predictor of the gap wasn't some abstract thing. It was how often kids picked up their phones throughout the day and night. Constant checking. The interruption itself. Now I could just stop there and give you the scary parent headline. Social media makes your kid worse at school. Ban it. And plenty of coverage is doing exactly that. But I promised you I'd be critical, and being critical cuts in both directions, including against a conclusion I might personally find convenient. So here's the honest part. This study, by the researchers' own careful admission, shows correlation, not proven causation. The scientists themselves, and the independent experts who reviewed it at the Science Media Center, were deliberately careful to say these kids appear to perform worse. Appear, because there's an obvious alternative explanation you have to rule out. Maybe the kind of kid who gets an Instagram account at 11, often with less parental supervision, is already in a different situation than the kid whose parents make them wait. Now, to their credit, the researchers tried hard to control for that. They matched kids who had equal test scores back in 5th grade, before any of them were on social media. And they accounted for family structure and parents' education. That's genuinely good methodology, and it makes the finding harder to dismiss. But harder to dismiss is not the same as proven, and any scientist worth trusting will tell you that. And here's the detail I find most interesting. The one that actually argues against the simple social media is pure poison narrative, and that most of the scary headlines skipped right over. The early social media users scored worse in Italian and math, but there was no difference in their English scores. And the researchers' own suggested explanation is fascinating. For Italian kids, a huge amount of online content, the videos, the games, the posts, is in English. So the same phone that was distracting them from math may have been quietly teaching them English at the same time. Think about how much that complicates the tidy villain story. The device isn't simply good or bad. It was apparently draining attention from the subjects taught in the classroom while incidentally building skill in the one subject the internet immerses them in. That's not a monster. That's a trade-off. And trade-offs demand judgment, not panic. So what do you actually do with this? Because this is landing at a real moment. Australia has already banned social media for under 16s. France just became the first EU country to ban it for under 15s. And the EU is debating an under 13 ban. This study is going to get waved around in every one of those fights. And my take is this. The study is a genuinely useful warning, and it is not a mandate. What the data most strongly points to isn't actually the account itself. It's the pervasiveness. The checking during homework, the checking before sleep, the checking at school, and notably, the kids with more parental involvement showed better outcomes. So the finding that survives all the caveats isn't social media is evil. It's something more boring and more actionable. Constant, unsupervised, around-the-clock access at age 11 has a real cost. And an adult paying attention measurably softens it. That's not as satisfying as a ban. It's also probably more true. My take, plainly, be suspicious of anyone, a politician, a headline, me, who takes a careful, hedged, correlation, not causation study and turns it into a confident slogan. The researchers were honest about the limits of what they found. The honest response is to carry that same humility, not to launder their uncertainty into our certainty because it happens to confirm what we already believed. So let me pull the three together, because the same thread runs through all of them. A government whose confident public number, far more than we need, collides with an alarming private one. A stock market whose confident headline, record high, hides the companies quietly collapsing beneath it. And a scary study whose confident version, social media wrecks your kid, is more careful and more interesting than the headline lets on. Every single one is a story about the distance between the confident number on the surface and the complicated truth underneath. The people handing you the confident number have a reason to want you to stop looking there. So here's what I'll leave you with tonight. The confident number is almost never a lie. That's what makes it effective. More than anyone in the world is true. Record high is true. Kids on social media score worse is roughly true. The actual work of being an informed person in 2026 is training yourself to hear the confident number and immediately ask the second question. Compared to what? Hiding what? Proven how? Because the surface is usually accurate, and it is almost never the whole story. The people who run the world are counting on you to stop at the headline. Don't.